Hi everybody, my name is Dave Teal. I work in XYPRO's Solution Delivery Group. Today I'm going to discuss XYGATE User Authentication and how you can use it to complement user authentication on the HPE NonStop. If you have questions, please use the session Q&A. You can also email me afterwards. In this NonStop training session, I'll discuss XUA installation, architecture, features, configuration, external authentication, testing tools, troubleshooting, configuration tools, and audit reporting tools. As you all know, user authentication on the NonStop is performed by Safeguard and requires a username or alias and a password. If a $CMON process exists, some additional user security checks can be applied, but only to programs that interface to $CMON. The best user authentication solution is the XYGATE User Authentication Event Exit Process for Safeguard from XYPRO Technology. XUA enhances user authentication on the NonStop. XUA uses user-configured authentication rules that can be constructed for groups or individual users. XUA also requires a username or alias and normally a password, though the requirement for a password is configurable. XUA has several optional keywords that can be used as authentication rule selection criteria to allow or deny logon. When a user logs on, selection criteria including from user, to user, requester program, ancestor program, terminal and IP address, time of day, and day of week must be satisfied. From user and to user are the only required keywords to be used as criteria for the selection of an XUA authentication rule. Some of XUA's features include logging on to a frozen account, freezing accounts at the group or individual levels when unsuccessful logon attempts exceed configured thresholds, logging on without a password, logging on with an expired password, logging down to any account from the super account, logging down to any account in a group from the respective group super account, and impersonating any user. Impersonation is a feature that can allow authorized users to log on to any target user ID or alias, including super, without knowledge of the target user's password. XUA can facilitate centralized authentication using LDAP so that users can log on to the NonStop with their NonStop user ID or alias and their network password. XUA can facilitate multi-factor authentication using RSA SecurID or Radius so that the NonStop is included in the enterprise authentication infrastructure. This can be extended to applications such as Base24 Pathway. XUA is one of 3 SEEP security solutions written by XYPRO Technology. SEEP is the acronym for Safeguard Event Exit Process. XUA has been included with the NonStop operating system since 2013. When a SEEP is configured to Safeguard, the SEEP can participate in NonStop security policy enforcement. XUA is easily installed, configured, and enabled to Safeguard, is managed using tackle macros, audits to its own audit location that can be integrated with XYGATE Merged Audit, also included with the NonStop operating system, and includes GUI configuration and reporting tools. Testing tools are supplied to test external authentication and the configuration of XUA. When XUA is initially installed and enabled, it authenticates exactly like Safeguard. Installation of the XUA software is performed using an automated installation script. The license files are distributed with the installation files. The automated installation script prompts for only the data necessary to install the software on the NonStop. When the automated installation script completes, XUA and XTR are installed, but XUA is not yet installed to safeguard. A listener process has started for connections from the XYGATE GUIs. The GUI software is distributed with the installation files, but must be downloaded from the NonStop to a Windows machine and installed manually. Using supplied tackle macros, XUA can be installed and enabled to safeguard as the user authentication SEEP. When the XUA SafeCom install macro is invoked, safeguard is configured with the necessary user authentication SEEP parameters, but is not enabled. When the XUA SafeCom enable macro is invoked, safeguard immediately starts XUA and begins forwarding user authentication requests to it. Other macros can be invoked to perform various operations, such as displaying XUA's status and version. You can use the XUA status macro to display the safeguard configuration of the user authentication event exit process. This diagram shows the overall XYGATE security environment with emphasis on XUA as the safeguard user authentication SEEP. When XUA is enabled as the user authentication SEEP, all user authentication requests are ruled on by XUA. With the XUA mover configured to XYGATE Merged Audit, XUA user authentication audit events are collected by XMA and alerted to XYPRO's XYGATE Security 1 solution or a security information and event management solution. This diagram shows the three XYGATE SEEPs with emphasis on XUA. Programs such as Tackle call a guardian procedure to authenticate users. If Safeguard is running and XUA is enabled as the user authentication SEEP, Safeguard forwards the authentication request to XUA. Using user-configured parameters and authentication rules stored in XUA's configuration files, XUA responds with yes, allow the logon, or no, deny the logon, then if configured, audits the result. This diagram shows the authentication dialog between Tackle, Safeguard, and XUA. Tackle first submits the username. Since XUA is enabled as the user authentication SEEP, Safeguard passes the username to XUA. XUA responds to Safeguard with the text password, and the user is prompted for the password. Tackle then submits the password to Safeguard, which in turn responds to XUA. XUA looks for a matching authentication rule in a file called UA-ACL. Multiple authentication rules can be in place at the same time so that different authentication rules can be applied to different groups of users. The UA-ACL file is where you configure the rules from which XUA makes its authentication ruling. The UA-ACL contains ACL groups and UA groups. ACL groups define sets of usernames, user IDs, and/or aliases that have the same authentication requirements. ACL groups may contain other ACL groups so long as they have been previously configured. UA groups define authentication rules. The UA group keyword must be followed by a user-provided name and at least the from user and to user authentication selection criteria. These three keywords are required in all UA groups. The UA-ACL is processed from the beginning to the end or until a matching rule is found. The first rule that meets the selection criteria is used to allow or deny the logon. If a rule is not found, authentication occurs anyway and is identical to Safeguard authentication. If the username or alias and password are correct, the logon is allowed. From user and to user are the only required keywords for selection of a UA group. These keywords allow you to create user-specific authentication rules. From user is the current user ID or alias, the user ID or alias being logged on from, often 00, but could be any user ID or alias. To user is the target user ID or alias, the user ID or alias being logged on to. This example instructs XUA to authenticate users just like Safeguard. If the user ID or alias and password are correct, logon is allowed. This is the default rule that is initially installed. From user and to user can also be used to deny logon. In this example, a rule has been added that denies logon to super from the logged off user ID 00. This is a common security policy used to enforce logon to a personal user ID prior to logging on to a shared privileged user ID so that the audit can show the succession of logons. It is critical that rules with more specific selection criteria be placed before rules with less specific selection criteria. This example shows the use of the frozen OK keyword to allow an account to be logged onto, even if it's frozen. With this keyword, the 100.255 account can be logged onto, though perhaps it has been frozen programmatically because too many failed logons have occurred. Adding the requester or ancestor keywords can allow the 100.255 account to be switched to in the case that it's a service ID and is not meant to be logged onto from Tackle. This example shows the use of the time days keyword to restrict logon to certain days of the week and a time window on each day allowed. A user logging on to a contractor account with the correct password can log on Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The same users will be denied logon if logging on outside this time window or on Saturday or Sunday. This example shows the use of the password required keyword to allow members of the $sysops ACL group to log on to the super user ID without its password. This example shows the use of the requester, impersonation from user, and impersonation keywords to allow members of the $sysops ACL group to log on to XYGATE GUIs as super. XYGATE GUIs require XYGATE TR to be installed. The requester keyword is used to limit the ruling to XYGATE GUI logons only. The impersonation from user keyword specifies the users who can impersonate the to user. With this rule, a user can log on to a XYGATE GUI as super, but with the user's password instead of super's password. This shows what impersonation would look like if you could see the password characters being typed into the password field of the GUI authentication window. In this example, I'm logging on to a XYGATE GUI as super, but I don't know the super password. However, since my user ID can impersonate super, I can enter super in the username field and my own username and password in the password field, each preceded by two special characters called impersonation characters. XUA detects impersonation by checking for impersonation characters in the password. By default, these characters are 2 forward slashes. These are configurable, however, in the UA comp file. XUA always looks for these special characters in a password to determine whether impersonation is being attempted. This example shows the use of the port keyword to deny logon to super if connected to the organization's VPN. A rule such as this restricts logon to SuperSuper to wired connections or wireless connections made within range of the organization's routers. This example shows the use of the authenticate fail freeze and authenticate maximum attempts keywords to freeze any user ID in the $pro ACL group if the number of unsuccessful logon attempts exceeds 5. Though XUA controls the freeze decision, the user is frozen by Safeguard and would have to be thawed using SafeCom or other safeguard management solutions such as XYGATE Safeguard Manager. When XUA is managing freezing users and/or delaying authentication, the respective safeguard settings should be disabled. Beginning in H06.19 and J06.08, programs that log on to a user ID or alias without a password require a safeguard ACL with the priv logon attribute set to on. Likewise, when XUA is enabled as the user authentication SEEP, an XUA rule is required that includes the safeguard priv logon keyword set to on for the requesting program. Examples of these programs include XYGATE AC, SSH, SFTP Serve, and NetBatch. Node conditional operators can be used anywhere in the UAACL file to specify inclusion or exclusion of any UAACL statement based on the NonStop node on which the UAACL file resides. This allows you to have identical UAACL files on all nodes, but still have node-specific authentication. In this example, the freeze pro after 5 failed UA group applies only to the NonStop node named guard. Using the like or not like operators, regular expressions can be used. In this example, the freeze pro after 5 failed UA group applies only on a NonStop node whose name begins with PROD followed by 1 to 4 numbers. This diagram shows XUA communicating with an external authentication server through an XUA OSS-based proxy server application. XUA supports authentication using LDAP and 2 methods of multi-factor authentication, RSA SecurID and Radius. As a reminder, PCI section 8.3.1 specifies the requirement for MFA. In part, it says MFA is required for all non-console administrative access into the card data environment. Using supplied tackle macros, external authentication can be installed easily. When invoked, these macros prompt for the necessary values for the respective external authentication configuration keywords in XUA's UA comp file. This example shows the use of the LDAP authenticate keyword to require members of the $everyone ACL group, except those who are also members of the $super ACL group, to log on using LDAP. Using the map keyword, regular expressions can be constructed that translate NonStop usernames to external usernames. Here, the map keyword translates the username by deleting the group and dot, and then again to append the remaining characters of the external username. The user experience with XUA LDAP authentication is the same as a native NonStop logon, except that the user's network password is entered rather than a NonStop password. This diagram shows the authentication dialog between Tackle, Safeguard, XUA, LDAP proxy server, and the LDAP server. The difference here is that XUA sends an authentication request to the LDAP proxy server, which forwards it to the LDAP server. The LDAP server authenticates the user and responds. This example shows the use of the radius authenticate keyword to require members of the $everyone ACL group, except those who are also members of the $super ACL group, to log on using radius. Here, the map keyword is used to simply replace a nonstop alias with the radius username. If the nonstop alias is the same as the external authentication username, mapping is unnecessary. This diagram shows the authentication dialog between Tackle, Safeguard, XUA, Radius Proxy Server, and the Radius Server. In this example, the correct nonstop password, Radius password, and Radius challenge are required to log on. If the nonstop password is correct, XUA prompts for the Radius password. An authentication request is then sent to Radius. Radius responds with a challenge request. If the correct challenge response is returned, the user is authenticated and the logon is allowed. The user experience with XUA Radius authentication is shown here. The user enters the nonstop user ID or alias. Prompting for the nonstop password is optional. The user is prompted for the Radius password, and if correct, is prompted for the Radius challenge. This example shows the use of the RSA Authenticate keyword to require members of the $everyone ACL group, except those who are members of the $super ACL group, to log on using RSA. Once again, the map keyword is used to simply replace a nonstop alias with the RSA username. This diagram shows the authentication dialog between Tackle, Safeguard, XUA, RSA Proxy Server, and the RSA Server. In this example, the correct nonstop password and RSA passcode are required to log on. The RSA passcode may include both a PIN and token code. The token code is generated by an RSA app that runs on your smartphone or laptop. If the nonstop password is correct, an authentication request is then sent to RSA. RSA responds with a passcode request. If the correct RSA passcode response is returned, the user is authenticated and the logon is allowed. The user experience with XUA RSA SecurID authentication is shown here. The user enters the nonstop user ID or alias. Prompting for the nonstop password is optional. The user is prompted for the RSA passcode. Using the RSA SecurID app on my smartphone, a token code is generated. My PIN plus the token code is what I enter for the passcode. The full list of mapping operators is shown here. Except for exit, each operator indicates the action to be taken on the remaining nonstop user ID or alias characters if they match the regular expression. Exit stops map processing. Use it to stop user ID translation when the translation is complete. XUA external authentication can be extended to applications such as Base24 Pathway. For Base24, a supplied macro makes the necessary code changes to the respective pathway requester server pair. The XYPRO solution adds a pathway requester that is called by the Base24 requester and a pathway server to perform the external authentication via XUA. For this implementation, XUA can run as the user authentication SEEP, ruling on all authentication requests, or as a standalone process, ruling only on Base24 authentication requests. A nonstop user ID is not necessary to perform application authentication via XUA. The XUA configuration files are edit type files. XUA includes two facilities for configuring the files. Though you can use edit or tedit, we recommend you use the supplied GUI configuration tool or XUA edit ACL tackle macro. The GUI configuration tool is shown here. All XYGATE Security Solutions configuration files can be managed with this GUI. Keywords are color-coded and appear blue when their syntax is correct. Tooltip text is displayed when hovering over keywords. For some keywords, a drop-down selection list is displayed. Syntax can be checked before applying the changes to the host version of the configuration file. Changes are not applied to the host version until the Apply Changes button is clicked. When changes are applied, the previous version of the configuration file is saved on the host. Some other nice features of the configuration GUI are the regular expression tester, product license information gatherer, and filter wizard. The regular expression tester allows you to test regular expressions prior to configuring XYGATE security rules. The product license gatherer displays XYGATE license information for one or more XYGATE products. If you have several XYGATE products installed, this takes a few seconds to complete. The data returned include the license expiration date and the number of days remaining on the license. You can use the filter wizard to modify an existing filter, create a new filter, change a filter's status, and change a filter's position in the XMA filters file. This is an example of using the XUA edit ACL tackle macro. When invoked, a copy of the UA/ACL file is made called new UA/ACL. All changes are made to this file rather than the UA/ACL file. The macro starts edit, but tedit can be entered from the edit prompt if desired. When edit is exited, the macro checks syntax and prompts for continuation of the new UA/ACL's installation. The macro then renames UA/ACL to a versioned old ACL file and renames new UA/ACL to UA/ACL. XUA includes testing tools to test authentication rules, regular expressions, and authentication with external authenticators. With the XUA Explain tool, you can test authentication against your authentication rules. A macro called XUA Explain is supplied that runs XUA in Explain mode. Explain mode displays greater detail. For less detail, you can switch to Access mode with the Explain Off command. In this example, I am testing a logon to the pro.david user ID. When XUA locates an XUA rule that satisfies the selection criteria I entered at the XUA Explain prompt, I am prompted for my password. For obvious reasons, I entered an incorrect password. The result of the test is displayed. Scrolling up, you can see where XUA mapped my NonStop user ID to my LDAP user ID and sent the authentication request to the LDAP server. Logon or check and the target user ID or alias are required for an access check command. You can include additional arguments in your access check command if you want to test other criteria. The asterisk is used as a placeholder for an argument. In the case of password, asterisk indicates you will be prompted for the password. In the case of other arguments, asterisk indicates you're not interested in a particular criterion. Access check commands can be placed in an edit type file and executed in a batch. Result and group allow you to predict the outcome of an access check. yes or no, and the UA group used. Any variance from your prediction is indicated in the output as an unexpected result. The supplied reg test program can be used to test regular expressions. Using this tool, a regular expression pattern can be entered, followed by a string. RegTest displays how much of the string the regular expression matches and the associated elapsed CPU time, indicating the efficiency of the regular expression. In an earlier example, I used this regular expression to delete the group portion of my username, including the dot. From this test, you can see that the regular expression matches the first 4 characters of my username. External authentication can be tested prior to configuring XUA rules. This is highly recommended since until the NonStop and XUA configurations are correct for communication with the external authenticator, there's no point in testing XUA rules. This example shows a test between the NonStop and the LDAP server. The trace argument is included so that the greatest amount of detail about the test is displayed. If you just want to test access, don't include the trace argument. Radius and RSA SecurID connectivity can be tested similarly using the Test RAD and Test RSA tools, each with the respective external authentication user ID. XUA includes documentation on installation and configuration. If troubleshooting is necessary, a workflow such as this can be followed to isolate the problem. After carefully following the installation steps provided in the documentation, you would use one of the external authentication testing tools to directly test authentication with the external authenticator. If unsuccessful, you would review the installation steps. If successful, however, you could attempt a logon. If the logon is unsuccessful, you would invoke the XUA explain macro to verify your UAACL rule configuration and make the necessary configuration adjustments. XUA audits to its own audit file, and since I'm using XYGATE Merged Audit to collect XUA audit events, I can display them on my workstation using the supplied GUI audit reporting tool, XYGATE Report Manager. In this example, I am displaying all XUA audit events, but the tool can be used to create customized queries and reports. Column titles can be dragged and dropped onto the gray row to organize the audit data however you want. Audit data can be exported so that you can do whatever you want with it. Alternatively, the supplied XUA report macro can be used to display XUA audit events. This tool writes its output to the spooler. There are 2 versions of this macro. The interactive version is shown here. You can customize the report by changing the values for options A through S. The non-interactive version is supplied so that you can run XUA reports using scheduling software such as NetBatch. Thank you for your time today. Feel free to email me with any questions you have about this nonstop training session.
All right, everyone. Thanks, Dave. User authentication is an important product. I one of those things that we provide and is of immense importance to your environment. But second to that is merged audit. So I'm going to talk about that for the next, I don't know, who knows, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever it takes, right? So if you want to skip forward on this, I'm sure you probably can, and many of you will. I hope you enjoy. My name is Rob Leeson. I work for XYPRO. I'm sure you've all heard of us. We are the premier security product provider for the NonStop. And I'm going to go on and on and on about my company because I like it here and I like what we provide. Merged Audit is one of the things that comes with your operating system these days, and that's what we're going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about the installation specifically. I'm not going to talk about any of those small details that you can get out of the documentation. I'm going to talk about some ways to get the most out of Merged Audit, right? So hopefully everybody gets some value out of this, and we all learn something, and let's start right in on it. So here is my thinly veiled agenda. It's basically what you see. I'm going to talk about XYPRO as a company because we do provide more than Merged Audit, but I want to talk about us because we've been around for a while. I'll give you an overview of Merged Audit. If you're not familiar with the product, I hope you are if you're attending this session, but I'm going to talk about it anyways, excuse me, because it is kind of a complicated architecture. We'll talk about how to get data, what to collect, how we collect, things like that. I'm going to talk about the audit configuration, how to configure things like Safeguard to properly audit so you get the most out of them. We'll talk about filters, the filters language and filter definitions and what they actually do. I have to talk about database maintenance because not everybody is a DBA or an SQL expert or even a system administrator that might be running this. So we'll get into the details of how to properly maintain the merged audit database. We're going to talk about reporting using the functions and tools that come with merged audit. And then we'll talk about interfacing with the SIM. This is probably the single biggest hitter ever, because this is what everybody wants to do these days. And it's one of the reasons that merged audit even exists. Interfacing to the SIM and being part of the greater enterprise is one of the holy grails of running a NonStop. We sit in the back room, excuse me, all day, every day, processing transactions, moving money, doing the really incredibly important heavy lifting for the enterprise, and nobody knows we exist. I've been in a lot of places where someone walks in and goes, what's a tandem or what's a NonStop? What do you do here? That kind of thing. And I inevitably have to explain to someone in senior management that the platform that I currently help manage runs the most important, both financially and operationally, part of their business. So making sure that we get the visibility and notice that the other platforms get and deserve is important. So we'll talk about that when we get into working with the SIM. I like to start all my presentations with a quote. I shouldn't say I like to start them all that way. I was told this is a good way to do it. You should have a couple of quotes in your presentation. So I thought this one was appropriate when it comes to merged audit and the NonStop again. Excuse me. So they say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, but it's not one half as bad as a lot of ignorance. I think this is appropriate when it comes to merged audit, because when we install merged audit with a customer, and I've done this for people hundreds of times now since working for XYPRO, people are always amazed to find out what their system is doing in the background, what their security subsystems are picking up, what their users are doing. There's a lot of value here. I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. I'm not trying to make light of anything, but there is so much going on a mainframe class system like the NonStop that this can help save performance. This can help save your security. This can help reduce your audit footprint and extent and everything else. So use merged audit, get the most out of it. Excuse me, and believe me, you'll look back at this quote and you'll think, my goodness, I think Rob was right. So Terry Pratchett's a good, as well as being a funny guy, he's also a good author. I recommend reading some of his stuff at some point. So XYPRO itself is headquartered in beautiful Simi Valley, California, just outside of Los Angeles on the west coast of the United States. Beautiful area, sleepy little town right outside of LA. If you hate LA, you'll love Simi because it's got all the benefits of living in California without all the headaches. Our company is a solutions expert and provider for HPE NonStop security. We have been a partner with HPE since back in the Tandem days. We, like Dave and I both mentioned, Merged Audit and User Authentication now are included with the operations pack that comes with the NonStop. We have been around for close to 40 years now, and we do really, really good security stuff. We're the #1 premier provider of security solutions on the NonStop. If we don't directly support a product, we're more than happy to help you make sure that your systems are secure. So if you have questions about anything security related on the NonStop, we are here for you. We are globally based. We have offices all over the planet. We have 7x24 follow the sun support. So if you ever need assistance directly from XYPRO, it's always available. One of us is always there to answer you. Once again, we talk about our strong partnership with HPE. We were the 2013 Alliance Partner of the Year. We've been around, like I said, forever. And again, HP liked our product so much that they decided to include 2 of them with the operating system by default. We are about 100 members strong in our corporate offices in California overall. And like I said, we're globally based with lots and lots and lots of years of NonStop knowledge. We acquired Merlon Software back in 2017 to get their database expertise. We do a lot of NonStop security, but because many NonStop servers are database servers, we figured this would be a good addition to our portfolio. We have strong strategic partnerships with some other companies you may have heard of, right? HPE is a huge one. I mean, that's where our core business survives and exists. But we also partner with other providers that need to access or interface or interact with the NonStop, right? So I'm sure you've all heard of CA. I'm sure you've all heard of Micro Focus, and I'm pretty sure most of you have heard of RSA SecurID, SailPoint, and Centrify. If you need to interface your identity management solution to the NonStop, or you want to use multi-factor authentication, or you want to talk to a SIM, or you want to do some data security stuff, we partner with a lot of companies. If we do not have a solution today that meets your needs for the NonStop, when it comes to enterprise interfacing, all you have to do is reach out to us. We are customer driven. We're looking for input from our larger customers, all of our customers, to find out what you're missing and what you need. So if we don't have it, you don't see it, let us know. Chances are we're either working on it or we didn't know that you needed it. So all you gotta do is let us know. So let's get directly into Merged Audit. Like I said, I'm assuming that most of you already know what Merged Audit is, but I do like to go into the details because there are some facets of Merged Audit you might not be familiar with. Excuse me. Merged Audit collects security and audit events from data sources such as Safeguard EMS and XYGATE. We can pull data from, I say this loosely, but any audit source on the NonStop. Right? If we don't absorb your data today, if you have something that we don't currently interface to, let us know. If you have a homegrown application with DDL, we can set up what we call a mover to absorb or ingest data from your application. If you have a security subsystem that we're not familiar with, let us know. We're happy to get that data into Merged Audit. The whole point of a subsystem like Merged Audit is to centralize the collection and normalization of your security data. We can't decide for you what a security data source is. You need to tell us. We happen to know that Safeguard, EMS, and of course all the XYGATE modules provide security audit data, but you might, like I said, you might have 15 or 20 other audit sources that you'd like us to include. So the whole point of Merged Audit is to collect that data and normalize it. So Merged Audit integrates with ArcSight and any other SIM. I use the term SIM a lot. It's a security, information, and event management subsystem or system. SPLUNK is a good example. ArcSight, Envision by RSA, LogLogic, QRADAR, Kiwi. There's a million of them. If you have a SIM and you want to get data from the NonStop to that central logging service in real time, let us know. No FTPing files, no moving things once or twice a day. We can feed your SIM in real time in a format that your SIM will accept, process, and consume without any issues. I'll get into that in deep detail coming up. We have optional plugins for products that not everybody uses, right? Base24 and Base24 EPS are really big products in the NonStop space. So we have what we call movers that will ingest data from Base24 and Base24 EPS. The HLR, which is now called the HSS, used to be called the Home Location Registry product from Tandem's telecom division. I think it's owned by Motorola these days. But there's still a lot of that out there. I know we've got some large telco customers that use that. We can get data from the ITP web server and from the Verifone product, which used to be called RTS from AJB. It's another payment switch. It runs in OSS. But we can natively absorb or ingest data from all those subsystems today. Like I said, if there's a subsystem you need or a product you have that you want to feed data to Merged Audit to forward to your SIM or report on, let us know. We're more than happy to get that worked on for you. Merged Audit is included with all NonStop servers. I'll tell you from what dates and all that kind of stuff coming up, but it's been available from HP on the NonStop for 10 years now. So if you have a NonStop server that's less than 10 years old, chances are you have Merged Audit already included. So Merged Audit is fundamental. It's pivotal to meeting things like PCI. If you have a regulatory reporting or audit requirement, chances are it's going to say things like you need to centralize your data collection. You need to send that data off of the host as quickly as possible so that it cannot be modified or altered. And you need it to go to a central server managed by people who have no interest in your platform. That's difficult to do without something like Merged Audit. And considering Merged Audit is included with your system, you might as well leverage that. It's extremely useful, it's easy to use, and I'm going to show you exactly why that's beneficial. Merged Audit installs completely and easily. If you use the HPE provided install, the automated installer, it will install the product on your host and all the components and get up and running in a very short order without any, I won't say any, very little interaction from you, the system or security administrator. It's really, really simple. I'll go through some of the different types of install here in a minute, but I'm not going to tell you how to install that. That's all documented. Merged Audit is easy to use. It includes an easy to use graphical user interface configuration manager editor that runs on a Windows workstation. That comes at no cost. Again, it's included with the product. It only runs on Windows, but it's considering that's about 98% of the enterprise on the desktop, then that shouldn't be an issue for most of you. And we also include a GUI reporting tool called XYGATE Report Manager. Both of these can be installed on as many workstations as you wish. We don't license these. They come with Merged Audit. You can use them as much as you wish. Now, please take note, they only work with XYGATE modules and XYGATE products. So if you want to use them for other things, you really can't. They do communicate with the NonStop over a TLS protected channel using our XYGATE transaction router. You need to install the transaction router on the NonStop. If you use the automated installer from Merged Audit, it installs it for you. And then you need to open one single TCP/IP port on your host to allow those tools to connect. I'll talk about that in a little length here in a minute. If you want to get the most from our products and our support teams and everything else, you need to register at our website. You don't have to be a customer. You don't have to be a direct customer. You probably need to have a NonStop. But you don't have to have a previous relationship with us to do this. If you go and register at the website, you'll be able to access all of our software. You cannot install the software without a license, but you can go ahead and pull it down. You can, and again, this is for proof of concepts and things like that, but you'll get access to all of our documentation, all of our white papers, all of our knowledge base, all kinds of things. You can open tickets here. You can do anything else if you're an existing customer. Excuse me, you can also register for product notifications and information. If you register for notifications, we will send you an email anytime there's a change or a critical fix or a new release comes out. A lot of us don't really check a lot of this stuff unless we have to, right? With HP, we go out every quarter or twice a year and we look for upgrades and things like that. With things like Merged Audit and things like that, we don't tend to. If you have any XYGATE modules in your environment and you want to know what's going on and get notifications of changes in new releases, go to the website and sign up. You'll want to go to that support section of the website and register there. Our internal teams will approve you. You got to use a business address. We can't accept things like AOL and Gmail a lot of the time, but use your business address and we'll let you in. Like I said, there's lots of good stuff on the website. So here's a kind of a grandiose picture of what Merged Audit looks like from a 30,000-foot level. At the top, you'll have our audit sources. I'm only outlining the big ones at the top there. This is not an exhaustive list. Safeguard, EMS, Measure, ODBC, and JDBC, as well as all the XYGATE modules. And of course, we have the optional things of the base 24 movers and then the HLR and things like that. Excuse me, off to the right, like I said, if you need a custom mover for your application or something else that you've written on the NonStop, let us know. We can ingest pretty much anything. If you really want to get there easy and fast, you can always copy your data to EMS and we'll put together an EMS mover that just pulls all that in if it's just straight text. So the data comes from all those audit sources, gets filtered. You'll see that filtered thing in the middle. Gets filtered down and then written into the Merged Audit database on the NonStop. And at the same time, that data can be alerted on or acted on via SNMP, email, EMS, syslog, or anything else. You can send it to wherever you want over TCP/IP or UDP. And of course, you can send it to the SIM. Remember, fundamentally, that Merged Audit is an operational data store. That's all it really is. It is a pathway application with a SQL MP database sitting under it. You do not have to be a pathway expert. You don't have to know anything about SQL MP to run this. It does it all by itself. The product actually comes with a license for SQL MP and a license for pathway. Those licenses are only usable by Merged Audit. You can't run your own pathway application. You cannot run your own SQL database unless you have a license for both of those products separate from Merged Audit. You can also install as many copies of Merged Audit as you wish. If you want to have a production version and a test version, you can. If you want every one of your users to have their own instance of Merged Audit on the host, you are more than welcome to do that. There is no limit to how many times you can install Merged Audit. It's completely up to you. So again, big picture here. Most of our customers find an immense amount of value in collecting the data, normalizing it, and then sending it out to that centrally managed logging service. You'll find a lot of value in that. If you are not interfacing to the enterprise team, you might want to try this. It takes an immense amount of load off of the NonStop administrators when it comes to alerting and reporting. So details. Merged Audit collects security audit events. Well, duh, that's what I've talked about since the beginning. Once again, this is the short list, not the all exhaustive list of things that we collect data from. Safeguard's a big one. If you are unfamiliar with the Safeguard Audit Reduction tool, SafeArt, or trying to examine Safeguard logs, Safeguard audit trails, you're going to love Merged Audit. If you've ever taken the time to run SafeArt or gone through your Safeguard audit trails, they're painfully verbose. Any specific entry in the Safeguard audit trail might be from 1 to 4 pages of output. An entry can have secondary records, can have additional fields, all this kind of stuff. We find that a lot of the data stored by Safeguard is redundant and or useless. So we weed all that out from all these subsystems: Safeguard EMS, the XYGATE modules, base 24, the Verifone product, all that kind of stuff. We boil it down to only the necessities, and then we take the fields and we map them to common entries. So we make sure all the timestamps are the same. We make sure all the users are in the same format. We make sure that the outcome is all recorded as positive or negative and all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to worry about the fact that one says true, one product says true, another one says yes, and another one says positive or something like that. We take all that data and we put it into, like I say at the bottom, a single audit repository for investigating who performed what action, where, and when in a standard format. I should probably add that verbiage on there. Every one of the products you see there has a different format for their audit trails. Another advantage of merged audit is we take all that data and we put it into a single stream of consciousness in a single format where you can understand it. Everybody can understand it. You'll once you get, like I said, into this, you can really start to appreciate it. So XMA provides a single unified view of your data. If you want to know what happened between 8 and 9 a.m. today on your system, you can go ask Merged Audit for all of that data. I need to know what happened between 8 and 8:15 this morning because we had a problem. If Merged Audit has collected that data from any number of subsystems, you can get it. So you can say, oh, I need all the EMS events, all the safeguard events, and all the XYGATE events that happen between 8 and 8:15 so I can troubleshoot this issue. Piece of cake. Again, it's a single data repository. It's an SQLMP database. Now, every instance has their own database. So if you have 20 copies of Merged Audit running on the host, they're going to have 20 sets of SQLMP tables. But if you know anything about SQLMP, you can do your reporting off of that manually, or you can use the tools that we provide. You can use ODBC or JDBC to access that data, whatever you need to do, but I'll get into that. Versatile querying and reporting for data visibility and discovery. Once again, we have GUI, a nice GUI-based tool that allows us to do reporting, and I'll show you that. We can send automated event notifications. Everybody wants to know or needs to know when someone logs on with a critical ID. Super, your security administrator, your admin, your application administrator, if that user ID is frozen, things like that, any service IDs, all this kind of stuff is important. I need to know if something happened and I need to know immediately. I don't want to know in an hour. We can do custom processing based on any event. No matter what comes through, we can filter and act on it. If you had an EMS event where the word daffodil came up in the middle of it, and that's a keyword for you, we can filter on that. If you need to know when an EMS subsystem, foo and event number 1171 came through, we can trigger on that. If someone froze their user ID and safeguard, we can trigger on that. If you had a SQL MX query that was running through JDBC and it had a cost that exceeded 1 million points, we can alert on that. If we can consume it, we can audit on it and alert on it. Once again, I'll get into more detail. Integration of the NonStop to the enterprise SIM. Once again, a huge win for visibility. And again, this is going to reduce the footprint and the overall utilization of your system and security administrators because they no longer have to run things like custom reports and setting all kinds of stuff like that. And of course, I keep talking about compliance, reporting, and monitoring for things like PCI. We deal with the PCI a lot because a lot of our customers are financial. It doesn't matter what compliance framework you're dealing with, we can help address that. Whether it be an internal risk monitoring issue or something like that, Merged Audit can help. Whether it be reporting or alerting, we're there for you. And remember, this should cost you nothing except a little time. Merged Audit is included with new systems. If you have the operation bundle, starting with any L series platform. If you're running x86, you have this. If you're running H series after H0606 or J series after J0603, both of these came out in 2010. Then you have Merged Audit and User Authentication, unless your enterprise specifically opted out of the operations pack. I think I've met 2 customers that ever opted out. It's so valuable and has so much in it, there's no reason to opt out. Now, Merged Audit also leverages both Pathway and SQLMP. Like I said, you don't have to have an enterprise license for those. Merged Audit comes with a license that allows us to use those only with Merged Audit, so you don't have to worry about those. And again, if you're not a knowledge expert on Pathway or SQLMP, don't sweat it. Everything's handled through the tool. How do I find out if I have XYGATE Merged Audit? Look for a subvolume called XYPRO. It's usually on dollar system. It may be on dollar DSM SCM, depending on where you put your DSVs. Excuse me, but it's probably there. If you have any questions about how to install it and the manuals aren't cutting it for you, call me. I'll spend an hour with you. My team is happy to do this. We want to see everybody using Merged Audit. When you go to install it, I said I wasn't going to get deeply into this, but I have to say a few things here. Dupe that subvolume to somewhere else. When you run the install process, it's going to expand itself and it's going to modify a few of the files that are included. You don't want to share that with everybody else. I shouldn't say you don't want to share that with everybody else, but the next guy or person who comes along may not want to install Merged Audit the same way you did. So dupe that whole subvolume somewhere else and run the install. You'll be happier in the long run. When you do go to run it, if you run the iWizard from that subvolume, it's going to install the whole thing for you automatically. It's a piece of cake. It's going to prompt you a few times, and then you're done. It's going to install Merged Audit. It's going to add all the default movers for XYGATE modules and Safeguard and EMS, and it's going to install the transaction router for you. It's going to do all of that without you having to do a single thing. If you want to run the old school or manual install, you can run the ins class macro, and it's going to prompt you for everything. Where do you want your database? Where do you want your catalog? What priority do you want to run things as? What user do you want to use? Everything. It's going to ask you all kinds of detail. That's fun if you've got more experience, but if you're just installing this for the first time, run the iWizard. You'll be happy. Do yourself a favor and do not install Merged Audit as super. There really is no reason for you to do that. Merged Audit will run just fine as an unprivileged user. Please, please, please don't run everything on your system as super. There's no reason for it. Run Merged Audit as 1,1 if you need to. Run it as anybody but a privileged user. Please don't use anything with a 255 in it anywhere. The current release of Merged Audit as I give this presentation is release 2.57. That's the current release from both HPE and from XYPRO. If you're running an earlier version, please upgrade. You're going to find a lot of reasons that it's better running a newer version. It's more efficient. It's got better functionality. It's got all kinds of bug fixes and stuff like that in there. So go out and get 2.57. If you have it on your system already, just go and run the install again. What you need to do is dupe that XYPRO MA subvolume once again somewhere else and run the iWizard or the ins class again. It's going to recognize that you already have Merged Audit installed and say, oh, I can do an upgrade. Once again, it's really simple, but if you want help or you're unsure, call us. We're happy to work with you on installing it. There's some terminology here that may not make some sense, and I've used the term movers already and filters both, and I don't want to lose people in this. A mover is simply a pathway server class that reads data from an audit source and writes it into the Merged Audit database. It's literally just a program that reads from an audit trail and writes to Merged Audit. That's all it is. Now, there are 3 types of movers. And again, the default is an alert and collect mover, but we also have movers that can alert only. They read off a data source and then they just write an EMS message, generate an email, do something else, but they don't write anything to the database. And then we have the opposite version of that, the collect only mover, which just collects data from the audit source and writes directly into the Merged Audit database. Those are uncommon, but they're available. Most customers use the regular combined mover, which both generates alerts and writes to the database. There's no reason you have to have one or the other or a mix of all 3. It's completely up to you. Depends on your needs. There's nothing wrong with any of those choices. There's no wrong answer. Now, Filters are what the merged audit movers use to trigger actions, right? So a filter, that we have a filter language. It's not difficult. It's fairly straightforward, but it's what we use to control how data is managed. So a filter will trigger actions based on incoming data. We can say do nothing with the data. We can say write the data to the database. We can say trigger an EMS event, or any combination of all of these things. It's up to you what we do with the data. Actions that you can do with the data include writing to the database, generating EMS events, emails, IP alerts, which is data that goes out over TCP/IP. You can ignore the data if you don't want to write it to your database. You can run macros. You can do all kinds of stuff. The filters are all stored in a text file called filters in the merged audit subvolume. Excuse me. We're going to get into how to manage and edit that file here in a minute. But these are the two key components to merged audit. So here's what it looks like, again, at a little lower level, right? Across the top, we have our audit sources. You can see Safeguard, the XYGATE modules, EMS, blah, 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 blah. Below that, they are audit trails. You'll see for Safeguard, they start with an A and they typically have 7 digits. For the XYGATE modules, the audit trail file is called audit by default. For EMS, it's not really a file so much as it is an EMS collector. In this case, $0 is the default. We also collect off for $ZCLA if you have CLIMs. For base 24, we read off the OMF, which can change periodically. Or for base 24 EPS, they call it the UA log D. The HLR has its own audit trails, and of course the ITP web server does as well. The whole point here is to show you that for all of these things, like I said, they have different data sources with different data formats. We take all of that, normalize it, and write it into a single NonStop SQLMP database. Not a database per product, but a database for each instance of merged audit. So all that data gets normalized and put in the same place. When you install merged audit, you have choices. You can install merged audit on each individual system. If you have 10 NonStop servers, you may install merged audit on each one of them. It's completely up to you. The other option you have is one other option you have is you can pick and choose which servers do data collection. If you have 10 NonStop servers in your environment, like I mentioned a second ago, 6 of those are production and 4 of those are development and QA, you might want to have your production servers not doing data collection. You might want to collect data on your development and QA hosts to take that load off of your production machines. This is completely up to you, and we can mix and match in between each of these. If you only want to have even numbered systems collect data, you can do that. If you only want to have systems in certain geographic locations collect data, you may do that as well. Once again, because the data goes into a TMF audited SQLMP database, you might want to use your favorite replication product to move that data around or modify it or do whatever you need to. I have some customers that collect data on every node individually and report from each node individually. I have some customers that send all of their data from all of their machines to one host and they do centralized reporting there. I have yet a third type of customer that does what I talked about earlier, where they have, excuse me, they have merged audit running on each individual host, but they take the data from each one of those in their respective geographies, and they forward that data to specific locations there for centralized reporting. So if you have, a couple of systems per continent and you want to forward data inside of their area or arena, you can do that. This facilitates things like GDPR and different geographic reporting and compliance requirements. So it's completely up to you how you do this. We can get as complicated as you want. If you want to talk about architecting a solution where your data is collected in different places, my team is more than happy to do that with you. Here's a picture of what a centralized configuration looks like. If you had systems 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they were all forwarding their audit data to system 1, you can do that. The downside of this is when system 1 needs to be down for any reason, whether that be an operating system upgrade or a communication failure or a power outage, things like that, your data collection is going to stop from the other three systems. So if you were collecting data on all three or all four systems independently and then forwarding it, you could have a whole different scenario there. But again, your mileage will vary. It's up to you how you install it. It's all up to you. Every enterprise is different. I don't know how you're going to want to manage your data and your resources. Here's another modified centralized configuration where you have the prod boxes collecting for each other and the dev and QA systems collecting for each other. Like I said, there is no limit to how you can do this. It's completely up to your imagination and your needs. Some customers like to load up their development systems with disk and leave the cycles available on production. And some are just the opposite. You know, some dev shops, some dev systems are one or two processors, four processors, where the production machines are 16 and they have extra capacity. I don't know what your enterprise looks like, so, but I'm happy to help you configure a solution. Merged audit can only report on what it collects. So if you put in garbage or you don't collect anything, you're not going to have anything to report on that's useful. Like I said, by default, Merged Audit starts up with a safeguard mover, an EMS, two EMS movers if you have CLIMs, one for $0, one for $ECLA, and any XYGATE modules it finds. If you don't have these subsystems configured to collect data, Merged Audit's not going to pick anything up. I had a customer that ran MA for a month and got maybe 100 records, and they called me up and said, why am I not getting any data? They had not configured Safeguard to do any auditing. So it wasn't picking anything up. So what they found was they needed to enable things like auditing authentication attempts and auditing access to sensitive data and things like that. You can do this in Merged or you can do this in Safeguard, or you can do it in the XYGATE modules. Object Security does it as well. If you don't have a mover for a data source, you're not going to get any data. If you installed Merged Audit day one and you didn't have any other modules, you didn't have XYGATE, you didn't have CCOM or something like that collecting your data, then we would have nothing to absorb. So let's say a year later, you've decided to install access control and object security from my company. If you don't install the movers for those, you're not going to get their data into Merged Audit. You have to go back through and manually add the movers for those. I'll show you how to do it. It's really not difficult. One thing that's in the documentation that most people tend to skip over, though, is the EMS movers do not collect anything by default. All the other subsystems, Safeguard, HLR, ITP Web Server, things like that, we pull in everything by default for all the XYGATE modules and things like that, because all of that data is security related. We know that. They're security subsystems. EMS is exactly the opposite. The event management system is typically not used for security data, so most of what goes in there is probably not security related. So what you have to do is go into Merged Audit and create a filter that says, I want the following events. Whereas for other products, you have to say, I don't want the following events. So we have to fix that. The other one we have to remember is that $0 by default on any NonStop server is configured so that you cannot read events out of it. It is secured UUUU on a typical NonStop server. So you got to fix that before you can get data out of it. And don't forget Safeguard also. If you're running Merged Audit as a non-privileged user, you're going to have to put a Safeguard ACL out there to read the Safeguard audit trails. I'll show you that in a minute. Two other subsystems that don't necessarily audit by default are SSL and SSH. They both come with the system and they both write to a file, but to get that data in a Merged Audit, you need to configure them to audit to EMS as well. And I'll show you that. Here are the movers that I think you need at a minimum. And like I said, Safeguard and EMS both get configured if you use the default install from HPE, but the others do not. So you're going to want to add an EMS mover for any EMS collectors you have that are not $0 and not $ECLA. You're going to want to add movers for any modules that XYGATE modules you installed after you installed Merged Audit. You're going to want to enable the SL sender if you're sending data to your SIM. The housekeeper should already be running. If it's not, by all means, make sure that thing is up. That's the process that cleans up your Merged Audit database every night or periodically. It might not be every night, but that's the process that keeps your database maintained. And then the MQ reader is what reads off your mail queue if the system cannot send emails for some reason, right? Your mail server might be down or unavailable for a period of time, in which case, if you have email alerts that are coming from the NonStop, they might get backed up. The mail queue reader will read those messages after a time and send them out for you. So I talk about XMA Manager here. Let's go over to my NonStop real quick, and I'll show you some of these things that I'm talking about. So XMA Manager is the key to managing Merged Audit. So you'll notice here I have but one segment file. It's the XTR segment. That's our transaction router, but I'm in the XYGATE subvolume. If I type XMA, well, it just ran XMA. What I want to do is run XMA. Now if I do a seginfo, you'll see I have the XMA segment. This is important. This is where all our help comes from. If I want to know what I can do with Merged Audit, I can type XMA help, and I get a list of functions that Merged Audit that I can do from the command line. This is great stuff. I'll talk about some of these things in a minute, but you can't do anything until you run the XMA install, right? That takes you to XMA. That allows you to run XMA Manager, which is right here. Allows you to manage the pathway and the movers. Remember, those processes that get data for you, and does everything you want. This is your best interface into Merged Audit. It allows you to manage everything. It does it safely and all kinds of other stuff. So I tend to spend a lot of time here if you want to see how your Merged Audit database is doing. So number one is the pathway manager or the pathway menu. Number four is a quick server status. So basically it tells me which servers I have running. I talked about the housekeeper. I have a safeguard mover. I actually have two of them. I started a second one yesterday for kicks. This is my syslog sender. This one reads off the access control audit trails. I had a second instance of access control I was reading off of. I have that one down right now. Object security, transaction router, and user authentication. That's what I have in my environment. The XMA Manager is how we manage all aspects of Merged Audit. We'll get back to that in a minute. I talked about setting things up so that you can read both $0 and your safeguard audit trails. If you will notice, the safeguard audit trails are secured to super only by default. I happen to know that mine are on $audit.safe. I cannot read these as an individual user right now. You'll notice that Merged Audit is running under my user ID. This is me. But yet I have a safeguard mover that's reading off the safeguard audit trails. B2W7. What's it reading? We get to the top. It's reading the safeguard audit trail. It does not have an error. It's able to read that. How? We have actually an object security rule that allows me to do it, but what most of our customers do is add a safeguard ACL that allows you to read these. My recommendation is this: safecom add disk file pattern $*.safe.a*. That should cover your audit trails no matter where they are. And you can say access, and in this case I have a backslash on here that says any system, and then 253,1 would be the user ID you're interested in. 253,1 in our environment just happens to be the security administrator, and we're only allowing them to have read access. If you'll notice, this only shows safeguard audit trails in my environment, that disk file pattern. So $system.safe.a and $audit.safe.a. So that disk file pattern would allow any user, again, if configured down here in the user ID, would allow them to read the safeguard audit trails. I don't have a problem with users reading the safeguard audit trails. Everybody needs access to consume them. I don't want anybody writing to them. Again, that's to me as a security administrator, that's the way it should be. The other one, like I said, is $0. If you'll notice in my environment, it is secured NUUU. When this system was first shipped, $0 this is delivered as UUUU, which means I can't read events out of $0 by default. To change that, you can do an EMS CCTRL, EMS control, EMS collector control, $0, security, and a new string. So in this case, I'm letting everybody read once again from $0. That's all I'm doing. To me, that works. It allows that data to be ingested. I don't care who reads off $0. So actually, this works in our environment and probably would for you. If you're not seeing any safeguard data or any EMS data, these might be the reasons. Excuse me. Safeguard by default does not audit a whole lot. Let's look at that. So my audit environment has all these things set. The same things I have on this in the presentation here. I have all these things set to certain values so that we can get what we need into merged audit. So anything that says fail automatically has an all on it. Fail, 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 fail. We want to audit all of those failures. There's some more down here. For everything else, for passes, we don't really need to know most of the time. The one difference to that is we always want to know about authentications. Please set this to all. You'll be happy in the long run. You want to know who's authenticating your NonStop server, both positive and negative. That's what these two mean. I want to know who's authenticating to my NonStop server, if they're making it and if they're not making it, right? So to show you what's not being audited here, I can do this. This will show me what the current values are and what the original values are. So here's the current value, and here's the default value that came from HP. You'll notice all of these are set to none. By default, Safeguard does not audit much of anything at all. If you're using OSS at all, this is a big one here as well. Take that one with a grain of salt. We don't turn audit client OSS on because it's very, very verbose. Look at our object security module if you need additional auditing in OSS. If you leave audit client OSS set to on, Safeguard generates a tremendous amount of data in OSS for things like people doing file listings, for people changing directories, for all kinds of little stuff. It doesn't bring a whole lot of value. If you notice that your Safeguard's really busy, your Safeguard audit trails are busy, it may be because this is set to on. Audit client Guardian only audit specific operations. They're documented in the Safeguard audit configuration manual. Again, not a whole lot of value there. My personal impression is set these to this and worry about the rest of it via other security methods. Here's a whole list of the parameters and what I recommend they get set to. If you want this, I'll share the slide deck. You're more than welcome to take these and install them in your environment. Good idea. The configuration settings here, I have said here, will show you what will configure your system for optimal Safeguard auditing. Here's the page 2 of the same thing. All good stuff. Once again, if you want to audit too much, set audit user action pass on a user. If you want to see entirely too much, set audit user action pass to all for super. What audit user action pass does is it audits everything a user does. If you have a sensitive user that only logs on twice a year and only does one thing, like sets keys for your what do you call the device there for your ESKM or something like that, by all means, set the audit user action pass to all. If you have a service ID that only does one thing a year, by all means, set that on. If this is the user ID that talks to your HSM, turn audit user action pass on to all. Do not do this for a regular user. Every process they touch, every file they open, every command they do will generate an audit record. This is unnecessary and extremely verbose. If you set it for super, it's going to audit everything the operating system does as well. Every file open, every communication that's made, everything. You will generate terabytes of data per day in Safeguard and Merged Audit. I do not recommend this at all unless you specifically have a reason to. And if you do turn it on for a user, turn it on briefly. Turn it on, test it, see what it does, and turn it back off. Audit user action pass is a bad idea. You can see this right here. Audit user action pass is set to none. And it should be that way for all your users, like I said, unless you have a very specific reason for not doing that. It's dangerous. I talked about the fact that you need to configure SSH and SSL to audit to EMS if you want to get the data in a merged audit. So here's how to do that. SSH and SSL do not by default audit to EMS. You don't have to use $0. As a matter of fact, I would probably say don't use $0. Set up another collector. When you do that, say audit EMS and a collector name, and then the audit format EMS to 95. That is an audit level or a format level for EMS. Look in the documentation to see what works for you. I know that 95 is an optimal level for us. It generates all the things we need in it. The SSH and SSL documentation go over all that for you. Let me show you where that stuff is stored. By default, it's stored in your SSH config. This is where it happens to live on my machine. So you'll note it audit EMS. So I have log EMS up here. I have audit EMS down here. So this is an EMS collector I'm using for logging, and this is an EMS collector I'm using for auditing. This has positives and negatives in it. This has details about the operations of SSH. The log format or audit format EMS set to 95, like I said, sets the file message format. We figured out 95 a long time ago was perfect for us. That's where it lives in SSH. And remember, each SSH process has its own config. So if you have more than one SSH process, make sure you pick these up. For SSL, this is the default location for SSH, ZSSH on $system. The default location for SSL is on $system Z NS SSL, Z nonstop SSL. So, and here is the default name of the config file if you use the HPE installer. Once again, I am logging to $SSLog, and I have a log format of 93 and a log level of 50. Like I said, these are just the values that I found worked in our environment. It's completely up to you what you set those to. But if you're going to do that, you need to collect that data and have it sent to Merged Audit. So set up an EMS mover for $SSLog if you're going to do that, if you're not going to use $0. Here's what it looks like in the log. And you need this, right? So it says the system name, the SSH process, it's got the user ID and the host they're coming from, and the host they're going to, the port number, and their authentication method. And then what service they started, and then their terminal ID. All of this is necessary for compliance purposes. I need to know the who, what, when, where, and why. So I have the time, I have the IP address, I have the user ID, and I have the service they started and their terminal ID. Complete non-repudiation. I didn't log on yesterday at 2053 from this terminal. Well, your user ID did, so either you logged on or someone has access to your user ID and login. Bad idea, right? And in this case, I used a password. If I'd used a shared key or a public-private key pair, that would have shown up here as key authentication. Here's what it looks like for SSL. SSL and NonStop is typically run in a loopback fashion, right? So I have an external listen on this IP address and this port, and it's looped back to the telnet port on the same adapter. So I come in through port 8423, I loop that back to port 23 on the system, and then right down here is the important part here, TLS 1.2 using AES 256 SHA for my authentication. This is the kind of stuff that your auditors need to see. If this was TLS 1.1 or 1.0, I would have a problem. I need to be using TLS 1.2 or later. So, and all that stuff needs to be logged. And you get that by setting those log levels and sending it out to an EMS collector for consumption by merged audit. It also goes to a file, but we prefer to pull it off the EMS logs because it's already formatted and ready for us to go. So let's start talking about actually managing merged audit. If you put this line in your tackle local, everybody will get the XMA segment set in their session. I showed you this a second ago. This is the XMA segment. This is where I get my XMA help and my XMA functionality. If I don't have security access to these things, they won't work. If I don't know they're there, I won't care. This doesn't weigh anything on my tackle. It doesn't impact my operational stability at all. So I recommend you give this to everybody. And again, there's really no reason not to. If they don't have security access to something, they won't get in. So here are the handiest functions off this list that I find most customers need. XMA Manager. I talked about XMA Manager. This is how we actually manage XMA. I can bring the pathway up. I can bring the pathway down. I can check the status of things. I can do all kinds of great stuff. Edit filters. If you're going to edit the filters file, use this macro. I could learn how to type. The beauty of this is, and you'll notice all these copies here, is XMA edit filters makes a copy of the filters file before I edit it. So if I make a mistake, if I delete the entire file, let's say I delete lines 73 through 100. Yeah, I want to delete them. Oh my goodness, I didn't want to do that. When I say exit, first of all, it's going to find a bunch of syntax errors, but it's going to ask me if I want to have the file purged. Yes, I do. Get rid of it. I made a mistake. I want to go back. So now I can go back in again. This one's great. No, I don't want to install the new filters. I didn't make any changes, so I'm going to purge that file again. The other one too is it does a syntax check. If I made a syntax error or something like that, I would get the same prompts and I go back and fix them. XMA DB volume. Where is my XMA database? XMA DB volume. Oh, look, there it is. These are my tables that make up the Merged Audit database. They're owned by my user because I installed it, and they all belong to me. So, la-di-da. That takes me to where XMA, my database is installed. If I just say XMA volume, it takes me to where XMA is installed, the program itself. They are in different locations. We keep them separate. XMA PW cool and XMA PW stop allow me to shut down and start up the pathway. If I do an XMA PW stop, I don't have to go into XMA Manager. I can just stop Merged Audit from right here. It takes about a second. Shouldn't be anything running. Nothing. Now, if I want to start it back up, I'm doing a cool start because the pathway's already been running. I do not want to set a collection date and time. I just want it to pick up right where it left off. All I have to do is hit enter. Merged Audit starts right back up where it left off. Everything's running just like it was. It kept its state and everything else. I don't have to do anything else. So I have SQL comp all. This is handy if I need to recompile my SQL programs and or update my statistics. I suggest everyone do this probably quarterly, maybe monthly, just to make sure that your database statistics are up to date. Oh, look at that. My pathway is still up. I need to shut it down. The reason for that is it wants to re-SQL compile all the programs that make up XMA. So I'm going to do an XMA, SQL comp all. Takes a few seconds, depends on how large your database is, because it is going to update statistics for all the database tables. And then it's going to go through and recompile all the modules that make up Merged Audit that impact the database. Like I said, you don't have to do this regularly, but I do suggest that you do it periodically. If you installed Merged Audit last week, do it now. Because when you first installed Merged Audit, your database tables were empty and performance was non-existent. Now that your database has been running for a week or more, you're going to want to update those statistics so that your reporting and your movers can run more efficiently. You should do this anytime a representative amount of data has changed. Typically, though, like I said, monthly or quarterly is more than enough. That's all you really need to do. XMA load defines will load your database defines if you want to do things like run your own reports or identify tables by their logical name as opposed to their physical name. And as soon as this is done here in a second, I'll show you what that looks like. And of course, XMA version. If you ever call support, whether it be our support or HP support, you're going to need the version of Merged Audit that you're running. It's the first question anybody's going to ask. So you might as well run that XMA version and get used to doing it periodically because, like I said, anybody who needs to is going to ask. XMA version is lightweight. It doesn't have any impact, but it's going to tell you what the status of your system is with a vproc. So here, as soon as this is done, I will show you what that looks like. These are all the programs that make up Merged Audit. I talked about that earlier. So we're recompiling each one of them. System's kind of slow today because it is, this is a multi-user system. I'm just one of many people using our host at the same time. So, okay, so it recompiled everything. I need to do XMA PW cool again to start it back up. I do not want to provide a date. So that's going to bring it back up. Now, what was I talking about? Oh, load defines. This just loads all the defines from my Merged Audit database tables. So I can use their logical names instead of their physical names. That's all. Helpful? Yes. Necessary? Not for most of us. Okay, so I talked for a second ago about filters and using the XMA underbar edit underbar filters macro to edit things. You can edit the filters file from the host, or you can edit it from the config manager. I'm going to show you the config manager because I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you should be using it if you have access to a Windows workstation and a port on the NonStop. Excuse me. Filters decide what goes into the Merged Audit database, and they also decide what happens to the data that goes in, right? So you can, like I said, we brought this up 100 times. I can send emails, I can generate EMS events, I can set up SNMP traps, whatever. So I can do the XMA underbar edit underbar filters from here, which is great. It puts me in edit, regular edit, and I can do this. I can go to XVS and edit it from the top. I can hit T and go into T edit and all that kind of stuff. But me personally, I like using the config manager. Here's the config manager. I started it up already. I'm sorry. I didn't feel like waiting to log in. So I guess I have to log on again anyways because my session timed out. You'll see that 3,600 seconds on there. So let's see. I'm logging in using my NonStop authentication, my NonStop credentials. So I'm going to go to Merged Audit. I can use this product to modify or manage any of my products, but I'm going to specifically to Merged Audit. And then I'm going to pull up my filters file. A huge advantage to using this is, as you can probably tell from the screen, is everything's color coded, and by default, my filters are collapsed, right? So I don't have to read through the whole file. My file is 2,403 lines long, but I'm not seeing all that, right? I'm just seeing the names of the filters. This is awesome. This is all they are is collapsed. This is, like I said, a huge win, because that way I can just look at each filter definition as opposed to each individual filter. I can toggle that on and off right here. That's outlining. Here's collapse and expand. Now, once again, because this is on Windows, everything is chroma coded. Blue things are reserved words. Green is a comment. Blue is a keyword. Now you'll notice as I hover over things, it tells me what the possible values are these and a description of each thing. So I'm going to ignore these global two at the top, and I'm going to get down here to filter def begin. Beginning of a filter definition, right? So it shows you the syntax. It says it's the beginning of a filter definition, and then it needs a $ group name, just like it shows there. If I hover over any one of these, it'll tell me what the syntax is, what it does, and says what the possible values are. So I've got mover begin, there are no parameters. I've got mover select begin, no parameters. I've got product. Here's a whole list of products that I can put in there. Any of those can be, so it says base 24 in there, but it could be anything off of that list, right? Same thing for filters. This one can be no filter, string filter, or macro filter. No filter means that it's going to pass anything it receives. A string filter says it's going to look for a string, and a macro filter says it's going to run a macro. This thing could do a whole lot of stuff. So this one's a string filter, and it's going to look in the terminal field for anything like zhome, VHT00, VHT01, or VHS. Now this is a regular expression. It's because it has the keyword like on there. But okay, see it says, you see the XYGATE manual, because there's so many different possibilities here. But once again, it's color coded for you. You don't have to guess as to what goes into these things. Every filter begins with a filter def begin and it ends with a filter def end. Inside of that filter, we have the mover definition, the data definition, and then the action definition. Those three fields must be in every filter. Now, what I can do, I'm going to go ahead and collapse everything. If I want to add a new filter, I'm going to go down to right here. I don't know what I'm doing. I just started this. So I'm going to type filter def begin. It's going to highlight automatically, and then I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to fill out, it's going to flesh out a default filter for me. So it sets it to inactive. I want it to be active. I want it to do something. Here, product. What should I put for product? Oh, I can put whatever product I want in there. So let's put in XYGATE AC. I don't want any other products, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Next section, I already have a product. Filter type. I'm going to say string filter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So I can remove the sections I don't want or don't need. I can set one of these up just like I did before. And then action type, I'm going to say alert. Great, and again, it's going to prompt me for the other things I need to put in there. I'm going to go ahead and delete this because I don't want to add a new filter at this time. All of this is documented. If you need to know what those fields mean and everything else. Now, on top of that, we have a sample file. You'll notice that the filters file here has a star on it. That means I have not done a syntax check or an apply change yet. If I change something in here and then I say apply changes, it gets written to the host and it gets implemented immediately. Notice down at the bottom, I have no syntax errors found. Everything's good. So I'm good to go. If I want to put a new filter in here and I don't know what I'm doing, I can always go over to the filtsamp file, which is a file full of sample filters. Let's expand all of them. These are sample filters that you can cut and paste over into the original. I'm going to go ahead and collapse them again because I want to look at something useful. So let's look at, where's super? Here, look at super log downs. If I wanted to copy this one, I could just grab it, Control C, and go over to my filters file, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it right here. The whole thing. It's already fleshed out. I really don't have to do anything. It's set to inactive by default. So I could change that. And this is going to tell me anytime from Safeguard that someone does a verify user, authenticate, or log on from user ID 255 and not in warning mode. So all I'd have to do is hit, I can say apply changes here. It's going to push it. It's going to do a syntax check. Then it's going to push that file to the host. And it's updating my config, and all my movers are going to pick that up immediately. Voila, no syntax errors found. Successfully updated the file on the host. I'm going to go ahead and remove that because I don't need it. I'm going to go ahead and apply changes again. Meanwhile, we'll go back to presentation. So I can edit the file or the filter from the host or from the GUI. I prefer the GUI, like I said, for all the reasons you just saw. I can cut and paste. I can syntax highlight. I can get help and everything else. To use the config manager, which is free, you have to have XTR installed on the host. If you need help with that, look in the manuals, call me, whatever. So let's get into some database maintenance. I'll go ahead and close this since we don't need it no more. Oops. Okay, so I go over this a lot. Merged Audit is an operational data store. It's made up of SQL MP tables, right? How do I know that? Up info star where table. Oh, look, I have a whole set of tables. The audit detail table, all these tables that make up the Merged Audit database. Let's see what actually has data in it. I'm not interested in most of these small ones. So I have two big tables, the audit detail table, and these aren't big. I mean, this is just my little personal instance of Merged Audit. But I have the audit detail table and the audit session table. This is where your data goes. Now, you need to pay attention to these because they can grow, they can get huge, and sometimes they can say they're big, but they don't have any data in them. So you got to pay close attention. So the database needs to have its statistics updated periodically through the XMA manager, and the SQL comp all will do that as well. And you also need to reorg your database periodically. Here is how I recommend you do it. You say reload, audit detail, new says start a new reorg, rate of 10, that's an IO rate. If you leave that off, it's going to run at 100% and it's going to hit your database very, very hard. And you can say slack of 0 because these tables are in time order. So if I do a fup info audet, stat, you'll notice that that table has 71,871 records in it and 2,000 blocks free, right? So let me show you something. That table is that table is 50 meg. Let's do something real quick. I wouldn't normally recommend this, but I'm going to go ahead and delete a bunch of data. What is today, the 18th? So I'm deleting all the records out of there that are from before 6 a.m. today in my database. What's going to happen is you're going to notice that, hold on, I probably need to set up another session here and bring down my Merged Audit real quick. because my delete, oh, I actually finished. But if you'll notice now, that table is not any smaller than it was a minute ago. I'm going to bring it back up. That table is no smaller than it was a minute ago. It is now open. But if I do a FUP-info stat on it, it just has a lot more free space, but it's still as large as it ever was. That table might have one record in it and still show the same EOF, right? So what I need to do is run a reorg. New, a low rate, like I said, that's on a scale of 1 to 100. I usually set it low, and a slack of 0. You need to do this periodically. If you want to check the status of your reorg, it'll tell you it's running, it's 11% complete. And look at that, it's done. It was 50 meg, now it's 5 meg, right? Now, I did not reorg the other tables or the other indexes. Just know that that needs to be done. You can do this in NetBatch. You can do it however you want. Talk to your database administrators. They're going to help you with this. These are the objects that need to be reorged periodically. The audit detail has 3 indexes on it. The audit session has 2 indexes on it. And then you've got some other tables that need to be reorged. The syslog queue table does not get populated if you're not sending the events over TCP/IP, so you don't have to worry about that all the time. See, my table is open, but it's not in use. So I don't have to worry about reorging that one, but the rest of these will certainly have data in them all the time. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, reach out to me anytime. So once again, to get the most out of your merged audit database, remember it's an MP database. You can query it using any tools you want. You can, like I said, I mentioned crystal reports. I mentioned ODBC and JDBC, whatever. You can get there however you want to. My favorite way, or a favorite way to get there, is using the Audit Report Manager. XYGATE Report Manager, like I said earlier, is a workstation-based GUI that allows you to query the merged audit database without knowing anything about SQL. I literally have to know nothing. Something's wrong here because I don't see, it's not pointing to my merged audit instance. Where am I connected? Okay, so what I should have seen up here is where's refresh tree? What I should have seen up here is my my merged audit, my Audit Pro reports, and I'm not seeing them. Sorry about that. But the XYGATE Report Manager is fantastic for reporting on your merged audit data. It will allow you to run queries all day long. And again, you don't have to know anything about SQL. All the data comes to your workstation. You can slice it, you can dice it, you can do whatever you want to it. I don't know where my Audit Pro stuff is, but let me get out of this and start again. Like I said, Report Manager is an awesome tool. Maybe I'll just go to a different instance. All the communication happens over TLS. You don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. Oh, for crying out loud. I just did all this. My apologies. There it is. That's what I wanted to see. I'm sorry. I should have connected this earlier. I just reinstalled everything on my new workstation. So the Audit Pro reports, the standard reports you see under the system name tree here are NScribe-based reports. They're not pretty. They're not ideal. They don't do what you want. They're great, but they're green screen reports that you can run from the host. What you're going to want to use are the Audit Pro reports, which is what I'm pulling up now. Audit Pro can report on any product on any XYGATE module on the NonStop, but its real power comes when it's coupled with Merged Audit. I wish this was faster, but you got to remember I am working from home and my systems are on the other side of the country. I'm about 3,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers from my systems right now, so I think I'm actually not doing too bad. There we go. So here's where I start off. I say Audit Pro reports, and I see a list of, these are reports that I've run in the past. If I want to run something new, I can say add a new report definition, and I will get a list of pre-configured reports that that XYGATE Report Manager already has configured. Some of them are broken down by their PCI requirement. Some of them are broken down by product, and some are just all activity reports. So what I want to look for is an all authentication reports. So here we go, all logons for any product. So I'm going to run that for today. It's going to hit my merged audit instance. It's going to receive the current time, and then it's going to pull up all of today's authentication requests. This could be a few, it could be a lot. Right now it's looking about, let's see, 2,000, 3,000. Look how fast that was too. All that data got pulled back to my workstation in little or no time. So now I have the data here. I can manage it any way I want to. I'm double clicking on the pipes between the columns. That tells Windows to automatically resize the column. I like the results column being way over here, me personally. I'm actually going to make that one smaller because it's way too big right now. And I can drag it around. So I'm going to take the result column and move it over here. I actually like the result column on the end because it's the widest column. So always move it over there. Now I can take any one of these columns and I can sort on it. So I just sorted on success or failure. I can do that with multiple columns if I wish. I typically like to sort on the time of the record. So where is my time? There we go, the time. And I'm going to move that one back this way. And I can reorder these here by doing query columns, right? For some odd reason, I don't know why I have it this way. I'm going to get rid of some of these columns. Audit key, I don't need. Current directory, I don't need. Terminal, I'll take. Object type, message ID, all these, message ID, I don't need. I'm going to take result and I'm going to move it down. I'm going to take off the GMT times because I'm using local times. And I'm going to leave everything else alone. Where's time? I want the time to be up at the top, date time. Then I'm going to do a retrieve, and it's going to go out and get the same data. But at least I'll get it in the order I like. So it's going to pull back 4,000 records, roughly, 3,000. And again, now everything's in the order I wanted it. And you'll see everything broken down by exactly what I pulled across. So another advantage to this is I can take any one of these columns and drag it up and do a group by. So you'll notice that product code is now at the top. I have EMS, Safeguard, XYGATE CM, and XYGATE UA. Oh, look, all these records came from Safeguard. Nice. Now I want to know which different programs they came from. So I can drag that up. So I'm collecting by product, Safeguard, and by client program. So I've got our transaction router, I've got SecPRVD, I've got XYGATE UA, I've got SSH's PAuth and SSH2, and then I've got three different copies of the transaction router down here. Then I can just drill down on the things I want to look at. If I want to ungroup, I can just pull the columns back down. I can also take all this data and I can send it to an Excel spreadsheet if I wish to. So File, Tab Separated, All Columns. It's going to generate that for me. It's going to put it in a text file and I can stick it on my desktop. I can call it All Auths. And then I can use it to, I can import it into Excel or do what I want with it. Or I can generate a report. I can schedule it here. I can change the report layout, fonts and everything else, landscaping or portrait. I can do whatever I want to it now that I have the data here. What I find here too is some things I don't really want. I don't care about alerted. You know, maybe I should get rid of that column. Maybe I only want to know success versus failures. Maybe I want it by object type. Typically I go like this. Oh, I only want to look at failures. I have a handful of failures here. One of them was me. I failed to authenticate at some point. Great stuff. The report manager, like I said, free, easy, included. Use it, leverage it. It's a wonderful product. You'll get a lot of value out of this, and it's so easy to examine the data without knowing anything about SQL. Mess with those query columns, the query criteria, the different nodes. I could have gone, if I had other nodes configured, I could have gone to them as well. And I could pull the data back to here and put it all in one report. I talked about the database maintenance. Let's talk about the database itself. Once again, Merged Audit is an SQLMP operational data store. Here are the tables that you're going to be interested in mostly. The audit detail table, which holds detailed records about events. Let me show you what that looks like. This is detailed data. Everything is going to generate at least one detail record. It's going to go in there in time order by its Greenwich Mean Time or Zulu time, timestamp, and a partition key. We set this in there so that you can partition the Merged Audit database if you choose to. If you don't know what you're doing or don't need the space, don't worry about it. Most customers live without partitioning this at all. But what you get is all kinds of information. What product the record came from, the user IDs group and the subject users group and the subject users user ID, the severity of the event, the user name of the individual or alias they logged on as, what system it happened on, what the target user was. This could be null null or super super, and this could be pro.rob. What the object name was it $system? Was it a file? Was it something else? I'm sorry, object type. Was it a disk file? Was it a communication path? Was it a process? The object name, like I said, $system, a file name, whatever. The operation, read, write, purge, create, etc. All this data is in there in detail. The audit session table correlates detailed records with sessions. My logon creates a new session. So I can use that table to join against the audit detail table and find out everything that happened on a given session. You don't have to know that. The tools will do that for you. This is more if you're a database person. I bring up the mail tables because if you have mail that's not going out, this is where it will sit. If these tables start to fill up, it's because you're not sending mail out if you have mail configured. The params table is interesting. It keeps all the config params for XMA. So I can do an SQL CI and report on my params. This is helpful when you want to know how XMA is configured. You can get this from XMA Manager, but sometimes it's just easier to run a query. So that data is there. The session no IP table. I've had some questions on this one lately. If a session does not generate an IP address, Merged Audit will go try to figure out what IP address the session is coming from. That's where we hold that data temporarily. And the syslog queue, which I addressed earlier, is where we store data that's being sent to the SIM over IP. Once again, you can go look at these tables. You can figure out what's in them. You can do whatever. They're fully documented. I just want you to know that these are important tables in the Merged Audit database that you might have interest in the content for. If you want to examine what's going on in your Merged Audit database in real time, you can do this. If you have if you have a license for SQL MP on your NonStop, you also have a license for SQL MX. Whether you know it or not, you do. If MX is active and available, you can use their publish subscribe function to see what's going on in your Merged Audit database in real time. Here is a query that I have written that does exactly that. The highlighted area here where it says $disk1 XMA.audit detail is where we have our audit detail table. You can change that to your location if you want to. Here's what you'll see if you're running that. I keep this running most of the time. You can see where I typed things and what happened. So if I go here and I type foo bar z, you should see that. There it is. I did a DSAP, so you saw that. Just to make sure I'm not making this up, now you can see what I typed. And it comes out immediately. That's the beauty of using the NonStop, is the fact that all this stuff comes up. Piece of cake. Here is how to get this into a file. Here's how to here's what the file contents are. You hit Control-Z to exit out, and then you can say MXCI in that script, and this is what you'll get. Just like I show here. You'll be able to see it. And once again, feel free to modify this. I put it in here for your use. Modify it, change it, do whatever you want with it. Here's a short audit report. Or an authentication report. I wrote this one because, like I said, Merged Audit's just a database. If you want to generate these from the host and run them all day long, you can. So oops, that's not where I put it. I use this is one I run every day. It doesn't have anything in it. See if I get anything this time. There we go. That's running better. So I included this. It's just, like I said, it's just an authentication report. S is for success. If it was a failure, there would be an F here. You've got your time, you've got your target logon, and you've got the client program. This comes out really beneficial for a lot of customers. Where did my report go? Help me, help me. Oh, I wrote it to auth 7. There it is. Oh, and it's kind of wide. You'll notice we're using some IPv6 addresses here. So I could have written it out to the spooler. I can send it anywhere I want to, but the fact of the matter is these things run rather quickly and there's immense value. Write your own reports. I include the SQL for that authentication report right here, so you can see it yourself, run it in your environment, just cut and paste this from the presentation onto your host and it'll work just great. Here's an important one that we see a lot of. My Merged Audit database is very large and I don't know why. If you run a report like this, oops, you can see exactly what's in your audit database by doing this. So I ran this report against my authentication database or my Merged Audit database, and it shows that from today, I only keep a day's worth of data in mine. I have the following events with the following counts. From Safeguard, I got these events. From XAC, I got these events, and this column's not wide enough, but from Merged Audit, I got 54 events. From XYGATE OS, I got these events. From our transaction router, I got these events, and here, and then down at the bottom, I have the total. On a larger database, this is going to show a lot more days and a lot more data. This breaks it out by day, by product, and by operation. Here is the syntax for that query. It's not hard, it's not long. This is a SQL MP query. You are welcome to it. Cut it and paste it from the presentation. Modify it to your needs. Okay, here comes the big stuff. Integrating your NonStop with your SIM. I've shown you how to do a lot of things. I've shown you that the data is pretty flexible and easy to read in Merged Audit. What it's not going to do is send itself to the SIM all by itself. You have to send it out there using something. And what we do is we use filters to do that. The easiest way to do this, it doesn't take any work on your part. What you're going to need is the name of your SIM or the IP address and the port number. And then optionally the format they want it in. If you send it in CEF, the CEF, the common event format, chances are it'll work just fine. But you're going to want it to go to SPLUNK, ArcSight, QRADAR, or something else, and have them, like I said, ingest that data and deal with it. We can talk to any SIM. I put the big three up here, but we can send it any SIM that'll accept syslog format, and syslog is just a clear text stream with key value pairs in it. And records that are separated by a carriage return typically. But we can send this to anything. I have yet to run into a SIM that does not accept merged audit data, and I've dealt with probably 50 or 60 different ones. So we're a powerful combo, right? We're a big system. Like I said, we're of critical importance to the enterprise. So we need to get this data over there for a million reasons. So any of the nonstop data sources that have data can be sent to the SIM. You can send all of it. You can send some of it. You can only send events that impact one user. It's up to you. You can filter out or include anything you want to. And like I said, we can talk to any target that's ever been invented that accepts syslog data, and some that even don't, over TLS, over UDP or TCP, all kinds of stuff. It's really, really easy. We can send it in any format you want, and the format is modifiable. If you want to change date formats, you can. If you don't want to include the numeric user ID, you don't have to. If you want to rearrange the columns, you can. All of this is completely possible, and it's really simple to do. The way to do it, oh, well, here's why to integrate with the SIM, right? You're going to need it for compliance reporting. All of the advanced requirement or auditing frameworks and requirements say that you have to send the data off host as quickly as possible, right? So if you're doing HIPAA, SOX, PCI, NERC, COBIT, whatever, you're going to have to send that data off to a SIM. We're doing it for you. Send it today. Worry about the format in the future, right? Get it out there, make sure it's going. You're going to find out that this comes in really handy, and your risk and management teams are going to love you. For security monitoring, once again, if someone's failing to log on as super or whatever, and you can't get onto the host, how are you going to find out? Well, now you can go to the SIM and see where all that traffic is coming from and what's keeping you from doing what you need to do. Send that stuff to the central authority. You can use it for application monitoring. Base 24, Connex, whatever. If your system's running slow or whatever, it's writing to EMS or whatever else, you can send that data over to the SIM or anything else. Operations management's the same thing. Do I have a disk filling up? You probably have something out there that's doing some of this stuff already, but there's no reason you can't send it via to the SIM anyways. Enterprise visibility, we want people to know that the nonstop is there. We want people to know that the nonstop is effective, and we want people to know that the nonstop has 100% availability forever. I have literally worked in organizations where we have had a nonstop server processing data and available for well over 15 years without an outage, right? We have data sitting on the nonstop, or set of nonstops, I should say, the way we're architected, and data has never stopped flowing in 15 years. People don't believe it until they see it, and if you start sending your stuff to the SIM, people will start appreciating it. Incident management, once again, if you're using Remedy or whatever incident management service now, stuff like that, you can send the data to the SIM or to the incident management utility and have it automatically do things like open and close incident reports and stuff like that. Alerting and reporting, I've gone into some of that kind of stuff. You can send yourself emails when people log on, log off. You can send yourself daily reports, all that kind of stuff. And Merged Audit, if you're running the report manager on a centralized server, you can generate reports without any interaction. They can run automatically at 2 a.m. every day and be sent out to a file share somewhere, and then you just have them. I'm not saying you have to look at them, but PCI requires that you at least collect them, right? So you'll have them out there. If something happens in a week, you can go back and look at them. The ISO 27000 series of certifications are going to require you integrate with a SIM. They want that data out there. They want that stuff centrally logged. They want it stored in an unmodifiable format. And a lot of SIMs will do that for you. And of course, log data retention. Disk on the NonStop is not cheap. Let's not kid anybody. So why don't we send that data off to a much less expensive platform and have it stored in on a Linux server with really, really cheap disks instead of eating up our very expensive NonStop hardware and cycles. Let's get it out of here. Let's let somebody else worry about it. And let's let enterprise log management decide how long we keep our data. To integrate with the SIM is simple. All you have to do is install a log adapter filter, LAF, right? So to do that, you can volume to your XMA installation and run the LAF, right? I'll show you how easy this is. So I'm going to edit my filters first because I already have this in there. So I'm going to take this off the bottom. I'm going to take this last paragraph off because I just added it. Come on, page up. There we go. I'm going to take this off. I'm going to stick it in my text editor here real quick. Okay, so it's gone. So I've installed it. It's not doing anything. It's just all I did was remove that segment. So now I'm going to run LAF. Mine's going to look a little different than yours because I've got a bunch of development stuff out here. But by default, let's go back to my slide here. It's going to prompt you for the type of adapter you're using. Now, on a typical system, you're only going to see 1, 2, and 3. You're going to see LAF ARC for the ArcSide adapter. You're going to see LAF RSA for the RSA adapter, and you're going to see LAF XS1 for our Security1 product. This is the one you're going to want unless you're specifically doing one of these two. So choose number 1 and move on. It's fine. Now, in this case, I'm going to put in my host address. Because I'm going to send the data to myself. So I'm going to say that my SIM is here. I also have, I want to send it to port 17919. Here's what I want to do. I set this up earlier. I'm going to use ETC0. Port 514 is the standard syslog port. You may leave that alone. I'm going to send it to port 17919 because I'm sending it to myself. I'm sending it over UDP. Remember, UDP is a connectionless protocol. When you put stuff out there on UDP, you put it on the wire and you set it and you forget it. The data just goes. There is no receipt. There is no nothing. If there's nothing there to receive it, then it just disappears. If you send it via TCP, that is a connection-based protocol, and the target has to acknowledge the data before it is removed from the NonStop. So if you need reliable delivery, by all means pick TCP. If you're just testing or whatever, use UDP. I use UDP all the time, works great. So here's my XMA tail. I'm going to get rid of that so I can show you my my SIM implementation here in a minute. That will go away. This is building a filter. What it's doing is it's taking that LAF ARC file and it's copying it and adding our IP address and all our delimiters into it. System's kind of busy, so it's probably sitting there doing its thing. Okay. It's moving the filters, it's moving the filter in, and it rebuilt the file and it loaded it. Well, I'm going to copy my filters file now. I don't need to edit it. And I'm going to show you what got added. This is the section that got added. Begin ArcSight adapter filter. So it says, it's called ArcSight, but like I said, this is Ceph. Don't worry about it. I told it to send to 10.11.241 and this port over this nonstop Ethernet adapter or TCP/IP process, right? So the data is now being sent there, and here's what that file looks like, the LAFARC file. So you don't want to mess with the headers in here, but if you ever want to change the format of the messages, you can change it in here. These are key value pairs. SPID is system PID, the process ID. System proc. CS4 has a special meaning in Ceph, and it's outlined in the documentation. Here's the end of the session. Here's the beginning of the session. CS3 is the same way. In this case, it's the session ID. Here's the host name. Here's the destination or the IP address. All kinds of great stuff in here. Remember, anything that starts with an exclamation point is a comment. Device dates, all this kind of stuff is going out. Now let me show you where that data is ending up. I started a little Python script here that is generating that data to my workstation. So you can see like here's where I typed what I'm doing. So if I do a dsat $* comma short, it should show up right here as well. There it is. So this is what you'll see on the SIM. This is what the data looks like to them. It doesn't mean a whole lot to us, but to the SIM guy, the SIM team, it means a lot. All these key value pairs get parsed out on their side, and they can actually load it into their database and see what it means and what it's doing. Like I said, this is common event format. You are welcome to massage that format into anything you want to at any time. Use the XMA edit filters file to update that file, and you'll be fine. This is the script I used to accept the data on the nonstop. All I did here was run a Python script. It's called log receive UDP. And this is the whole script. This is the entire thing right here. And I run that so that I can accept log data to test. All this does is open a UDP port on my nonstop. And then you'll see it over here. The same way we did with the tailing out the log. So everything that comes through Merged Audit on this host in this instance of Merged Audit is being sent to the SIM. And this is a representative example of what they're seeing over there. It happens very, very quickly. And again, with TCP, it's reliable as well. And it's really easy to get implemented, like I said. Here's what the data looks like. Here's the data definition in Merged Audit for what it looks like. I just showed you that. This is here for an example. If you want to know what those key value pairs are, if your SIM team says, I don't like CS4, I don't like start end, I don't need CS2, I don't want DUID, I don't need any of that kind of stuff, you can change it. This stuff all comes in an edit file. Don't mess with the header, but all the rest of this is completely modifiable by you. So like I said, change that, modify it, do whatever you need to, play with it, practice with it. Send the data to your SIM and work with the team on getting that data integrated. You want to be a team player and you want to be a part of the bigger enterprise. So once again, whether it's LogLogic, SPLUNK, ArcSight, QRADAR, RSA Envision, I don't care. Whatever the SIM is, you can send to it. If you start sending data right away, you can spend a little time later massaging that data into a format that they're happy with and that works for you. Make sure you're getting everything over there. Make sure you're collecting what you need to collect, and all will be good in the land of nonstop. So today, I kind of taught you, hopefully, I taught you how to fish, right? The Native Americans used to say, teach a man to, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for life. Here's the same kind of thing from that guy I talked about earlier, Terry Pratchett. He had the same kind of idea, but his was a little more colorful. So what I'm hoping you'll do with this is you'll go out, and if you don't have Merged Audit installed, you will. Once you do get Merged Audit installed and you start collecting data and you decide you're happy with what you're getting, start sending it to the SIM immediately. Like I said, be careful. Most of the SIMs these days are volume based. A large NonStop server can generate a tremendous amount of data. You do not want to upset the SIM team by sending them 100,000 records in the first hour. So start collecting data on the NonStop, review what you're collecting, and then work with your SIM team to send them a few events at a time to see if it works. Once they're happy, once you've worked with your risk and your compliance teams on what they want to see, send over that data. Don't send over everything, send over what you need. It makes a difference. Your teams will appreciate you. Like I said, your risk and audit teams will love you, and it will take load off of the NonStop and off of your back. No more reporting, no more ad hoc. Can I have this? What happened yesterday from 2 to 3 p.m.? Why don't you guys go to the Splunk team and ask them? It works really well. Everybody gets happy, and most people with access to the Splunk console can do the work themselves. They don't have to bother you anymore. If you need more information, Merged Audit documentation is actually on the HP website, and so is the user authentication data in the NonStop docs section. XMA runs on every currently supported release of Guardian, the NonStop kernel, so you should be able to find it under any of the releases out there. And of course, HP does education, and so does XYPRO. If you need one-on-one instruction on how to do this, reach out to me, reach out to your sales team, reach out to anybody at XYPRO. We'll help you out. There's Merged Audit, like I said, is pretty self-managing and self-running, but there are some gotchas. If you don't understand it, or if you're intimidated or confused, reach out to me. My team will be happy to help. That's NonStop Academy. Thank you for them running this. And of course, thank you to Connect for setting this whole thing up. We appreciate it. The NonStop Bootcamp this year has been fantastic. I was worried we weren't going to have it because of COVID and all that kind of stuff, but it turned out it's been quite a great experience, and I thank you all for that. If you need to get a hold of me or anybody at XYPRO, you can go to XYPRO.com, or you can reach me at my email address right there, and that phone number is our main office in North America. If you dial that and hit extension 203, you'll be able to talk to me anytime. Thank you. I guess we're going to open the floor for any Q&A that I have not already handled, and hope to see you all around. Thanks.